My name's Troy Schneider. I'm the editor of FCW, and I'm very happy to be here to moderate this panel today. We're going to look at, at how cloud adoption in DoD is progressing and how the security controls are evolving and what it really takes to get this moving along. But before we get started, if I could just sort of do a poll of the audience, not that I can see the audience. How many here are part of DoD? How many are in the vendor community working with DoD? How many are just trying to figure out what the hell the cloud security standards are for DoD? Okay. And how many of you came with specific questions you're hoping to get answered? All right, well, we'll talk amongst ourselves. Very good. Clearly, cloud adoption at DoD is a complicated and evolving process. And we want to talk about what hurdles are there right now involving compliance, implementation, and just sort of what's happening in the trenches for organizations that are trying to move forward here. So let me briefly introduce our panelists. I'll let them tell you a little bit more about what they do, and we will just roll from there. So immediately to my left here, we have Brad Ballou from Booz Allen Hamilton. Next to him, David OBarry from McAfee Intel.
Yes, sir.
And Colonel David Wilder of the U.S. Air Force. And then on the end, we were supposed to have Mark Fox from Amazon. He had a family emergency, couldn't be here. Todd Gagoric is happy to step in, and since he's the new guy, we're going to steer all the hard questions his way. And and to prove that, Todd, you want to start with a little bit about what you do at Amazon and sort of how you see the compliance efforts moving forward?
Sure. So I manage the Federal Solutions Architect teams at AWS Federal, both on the civilian side and the DoD side, and that's my primary responsibility. I primarily focus, when I'm not doing that, on civilian agencies, so thus being not Mark Fox, I'm going to talk to these guys mostly, and my guys who are in the front row, I might throw questions at them as well. But just generally, we continue to work very closely with the components in DoD, DISA, SPAWAR, to define and continue to enhance the definitions around the SRG, different approaches and alternatives to the CAP design and how we're able to implement that and just basically try and move that ball along. It's a significant effort, as you can imagine, and we have a couple guys that pretty much spend their life working on that part of the business. So we're pleased with where things are moving, and we think that we're going to be able to get there, hopefully.
Brad, can you talk a little bit about it from the consulting perspective?
Yeah, so, excuse me. So I work in Booz Allen's Strategic Innovation Group. I lead technical teams who design and build security solutions in commercial clouds that go above the hypervisors. We look at helping our customers secure their applications, secure their perimeter, and help them comply with the reigning controls as part of the DoD RMF process or FISMA. And so, although the FedRAMP and things like that have benefited our customers, there's still a big piece that's left in terms of securing the application. So that's where I spend most of my time day to day.
And and David?
Yep.
Immediate David?
Yeah, sure. David first, so wait, is it SIG that helps implement STIGs? Is that what it really is? That's pretty cool, actually. So I'm David OBarry. I'm with Intel Security Group, formerly known as McAfee, AKA McAfee, the McAfee product line in Intel's organization. So basically from our perspective, it really comes with, how do you move the ecosystem forward? So the way the way you standardize and share standards-based information in real time and things like that are incredibly important. That's a lot of the standards that we're pushing right now with our data exchange layer of being able to give as much visibility to the end user, to the customer, as you can, no matter where you're at. So, all of the standards are incredibly important from our perspective, simply because without that, when it's fractured, there's almost no way to move forward. So, I'm all about standardize, commoditize, ubiquitize. So, get it out there and don't reinvent the wheel all the time.
Can we have one of you be David and one of you be Dave?
You can be Dave.
Okay, only because you're a colonel, I'll take that.
So, Dave Wilder, the perspective I bring is really kind of from the bottom up. I represent the customer, and I'm in a little bit of a unique situation where the application that we're currently using for real-world mission capability is dying a slow, painful death, and it's non-compliant. So we've been given a countdown clock to get rid of it. So we're in development and have been in the cloud for the last couple of years in development with a replacement system for that. And we are working through the various bureaucracies to be able to get level 2 and level 4 certified. And I say it in that order because that's kind of the experience we're having. So the experience I bring is just sort of like what it's been like in the trenches as a mission owner to be able to field something that's not a novelty. It's something that's actually mission essential, and it's something that we were driven to do. It's not a nice to have, I guess, better best way to describe it.
And can you give us just sort of the elevator? Is this on? No? Okay. It is on, okay. Can you give us just a little bit more of the elevator pitch about the project you're working on, sort of where it stands now, the snags you're running into, just to give us a sense about what it's like to try and move one of these projects forward?
Well, sure. The interesting thing about my experience, and I'll give you just a quick 2-second soundbite on my background. I don't know anything about IT. So if you're going to ask me a technical question, I'm just going to give you a blank stare. I'm just, again, a mission owner that fell into a situation that actually had an application that, like I said, was dying. So about 2.5 years ago, I'd say, we put together a really, really solid business case to go before a DCMO and actually get approval to pursue a COTS product that would replace our legacy system. And so we got through the hurdles for acquisition and are on track to deliver that system. In parallel, we were instructed that the current configuration of the DoD wouldn't allow for the interoperability we have with state and local governments for the grants program that we work on. And so we were actually directed to go to the cloud, which is great news, and we were glad to be a part of the pilot to be able to go through this and actually get onboarded with their CAP process. And along the way, what we've kind of found out is that a lot of the different organizations that are either supporting us or supporting kind of early adopters just don't have the processes in place to be able to sort of answer the call, if you will, from the mission owner. So one of the things that we're partnering with a number of folks in government, a number of offices, are helping to define those processes as we go, which we're glad to do. I mean, that's not really so much of a hurdle, but it is a little bit difficult kind of getting over I guess I would call it the 12 stages of grief when it comes to the cloud. Every office that we approach, it's which stage are you in? Are you in anger, denial, acceptance, bargaining? You pick which stage. And so we're having to adjust our strategy to meet specific contractual timelines to sync up organizations outside our control to be able to enable the capability we're trying to field.
Great, thanks. If we can just sort of step back to the policy issue for just a second, and have the changes that we've seen over the last couple months and that continue to keep going with the Security Requirements Guide, this idea of FedRAMP Plus, cloud access point requirements, is the fact that that's something of a moving target, is that complicating the adoption process, and how are the compliance efforts evolving? I mean, Todd, can you start on that?
Sure. I think it absolutely does complicate the effort. It certainly stalls deployments and makes it much more difficult for any of these components to move forward in these mission areas. We see that across the board. And there's a lot of ambiguity, I think, that exists around what workloads, what data classifications can go where. Certainly in our cloud, there's confusion around what has to go in GovCloud, what has to go, or what could go in the other regions within CONUS. Those kinds of questions keep coming up, and it's a constant re-education mission on our part to say, level 2 can go here, level 4 or 5 have to go here, these need a cap, these don't need a cap, and so there's a lot of confusion around that, and it certainly slows things down.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges is things are always in motion. Even when you get to a final SRG or STIGs for various CSPs, it's always going to be a moving target. And the problem, though, is you have a lot of people who want to just wait and see. Let's wait and see how this other organization figures it out, or what the next version of the policy looks like. I'm very much in favor of let's take the information we have now and make the best decisions we can and move forward. You've got people at the top and the mission owners like Colonel Wilder here who want to go forward and do it, and I think everyone else needs to get on board.
Yeah, I think perfection is the enemy of progress in that situation. To his point, and the military has done an incredible job, and I oftentimes use Boyd's loops or OODA loops as it relates to the iterative nature of what they, how they do things, and that's a really good model for what we're doing, not only from cybersecurity side, but cybersecurity in the cloud. And I think sometimes we go away from what the foundational aspects of what moves organizations forward are, and you can't wait for perfection. It's not going to happen.
Yeah,
And for those in the audience, the OODA loop is observe, orient, decide, and act. I think we got 3 of those down. It's the act part that we're looking for.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, Colonel Wilder, it's, how does it feel on the, on the mission side with this? Are you, is the moving target of the policy the issue, or are your challenges sort of further down the stack? Because it seems like there's support at the high policy level with.
So I guess my perspective is a little bit different, and if I was industry, I'd want things to move faster, obviously, because there's money to be made, and I know that there's been a lot of work getting things ready for the eventuality. 2 things I know for a fact, or that for a fact that I can tell everybody here, the 2 things that I can rely on are death and taxes, right? Mm-hmm. So the 3rd thing is going to be the cloud, and the reason why I say that is because you hear the rhetoric on the Hill about infrastructure, and I'm talking about physical infrastructure, pipes and buildings and that kind of thing, and the high cost of that. And you hear about discussions about BRAC and the services trying to get their arms around this. Well, we have a huge infrastructure with our data centers as well too. So when you talk about, is it confusing things from a policy perspective? The leadership is there at the top. So Mr. Halverson's doing everything he can to kind of shake things up from a policy perspective to enable. And I think that's exactly the right move. And it is hard, and people are being cautious, and I understand why. I mean, every time I open the Post, it's, who's got our data yesterday, right? So even Congress is talking about the acronym for the cloud being something kind of pejorative or whatever. So the trick for me is not so much worrying about what the SRG says or doesn't say, or the confusion around it, and I know it's important for the folks to have to enable. It's sort of a trickle-down thing. There's really nobody picking up the banner. And so there's sort of a lack of leadership in that regard. And I don't mean to poke anybody in the eye. It's not about an organization's lack of leadership, because there are actors out there that are really killing it. Jack Wilmer at DIS is doing great things, getting the cap ready. We've got some cyber warriors in our own DAA that are really helping us get where we need to go. But it's really kind of navigating that fear and uncertainty and doubt. And it's hard to define where people are at in those 12 stages of grief, because the decision makers in that OODA loop, you have to be able to service not only them, at the same time you're coming up with a technical solution, you've got to be able to get them comfortable so that the resources can be brought to bear to be able to get to the cloud.
And I think the issue is that a lot of times people assume that, put it in the cloud and it's either going to be less secure or more secure. No, if you put a bad app in the cloud, it's going to be less secure. I think the problem you've got in that situation is that, the cloud, like you said, has become almost pejorative, right? Once we put it up there, everything becomes more difficult or whatever. And the reality is, it's no different than virtualization and things like that. Done right, it's an incredible ops savings. The problem is that you get into a situation now where people get frozen. Not just with whether or not the standard is going forward, but just with what the actual rubber to the road is. What's the actionable best practice? Not just the best practice from the ivory tower aspect.
So I want to jump on a point that David mentioned in terms of moving an app.
It's David.
I'm sorry.
I'm Dave, for right now.
Thanks. So the question of whether or not it's more secure or less secure to go to the cloud. And one thing is, looking at Washington Post, all these breaches, are those really cloud-based apps or not? I guess the question is, it doesn't really matter, right?
Nope.
It's a
Exactly.
service that's either facing a private network or a public network. And our attackers took advantage of vulnerabilities either in the technology or the organization or the people. And so I think when in the process of moving to the cloud, you have to kind of discover what you've got in the first place. In that process itself, you can identify, okay, you see box A is talking to box B, maybe it shouldn't be, maybe we should define a policy when we migrate to the cloud. Kind of a cleaning house takes place when you migrate apps. So I think that process of migrating is what makes things more secure.
Some of the joint command. Oh, go ahead, sir.
So I was just going to say, I think part of what drives that is there's a growing, certainly perspective from the other side of the fence, the civilian world, right? There's a growing perspective and kind of a new normal that's being embraced across the government, where federal CIOs and deputy CIOs and guys that they're talking to FCW and guys like you, they're expressing that they're beginning to see that they can be more secure in the cloud than they can actually be in their own environments, because the level of complexity and the lack of consistency that they have to manage internally, that largely goes away when you move to a consistent cloud model where all of that infrastructure is essentially abstracted away from you. And now there is that notion of shared responsibility. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's nothing stopping any of you from standing up a server on the AWS cloud, opening every port, turning on every protocol, and having it owned in 5 seconds, right? That's your problem, and that will continue to be your responsibility to manage that. But there's a lot of it that goes away when you have that consistency of infrastructure that underlies it, that's just it's abstracted away
Well,
from you.
but let's be clear also, and it cuts both ways, right? I mean, it's the standardization aspect. If you don't get the security piece right, it just opens you wide up. But let's also be clear that DoD, of all of them, when you talk about like the Joint Command and different things like that, I mean, the sheer amount of apps that they're talking about, that they're having to, what you're talking about, how you get rid of those apps as you go forward, the ones that are going to stay versus, I was astounded at the number of apps they had already trimmed down. And I think that they get it right. I mean, people can make all the jokes they want about public sector, whatever. I was on the customer side for 19 years. I came from state and local government, and I know we borrowed every time we could, from NIST, from the stuff that the DoD is doing and publishing and things like that, simply because commercial does not get it more right than DoD. In a lot of ways, they're way out ahead. It probably doesn't bode well. I mean, probably doesn't sit well with commercial companies to say that. One of the problems we've had in the industry is that we fractured this situation with cloud. And the situation where you actually get into a standards battle, who's got this, what's the standard interchange? Just talk about portability and interoperability in a cloud and visibility. Just give me that. So I think Amazon's really moved the needle a good ways in that situation. But we fractured this for a number of years, and it's really putting Humpty Dumpty back together.
So, earlier this morning, Tony Scott said that pretty much every agency he sees is moving to the cloud, and I hear every agency talking about moving to the cloud, but there aren't a lot of clear success stories, clear wins out there, and I'm curious from the industry perspective first, why you think that is? Is it that fear of being an early adopter, or particularly in the DoD side, are there other kind of bottlenecks that they're trying to work through?
Well, I can tell you on the civilian side, again, I'm going to go back to that because there are many clear wins in the cloud from our customer base, certainly on the civilian side.
They can't publicize that necessarily.
Well, there's actually several that we can talk about.
Hey, please call me, okay?
FINRA is certainly an example of that. An agency that's moving a significant workload, and there are many others that are moving or have already moved all into the cloud, and some we can reference, some we can't. But the reality is that they seem to have gotten ahead of, I think, this policy hurdle, because FedRAMP has certainly enabled that, FISMA has enabled that, and while you still have to layer on DICAP and all that on your side, they don't have that constraint, and they've gotten the FedRAMP FISMA stuff worked out, so they're able to move ahead with some level of expedition. Right?
You from your perspective, I didn't want to step in, so.
I also think maybe a different way to look at it. So there are some wins, there's some good wins, but also you don't necessarily want to advertise a win, right? You don't want to paint a target on your back, and then be the reason not to migrate to the cloud. But one other fact I want to pull up. So there was a GAO report at the end of last year, and then FedRAMP Forward also came out that tried to count the number of federal apps that migrated. Maybe you've got a better number from your perspective, but the numbers were like 100, 101, 160 applications that have migrated to the cloud. It's probably a low number, right? So some data calls probably weren't accurate, so maybe it's closer to 500 or so. But I remember a couple years ago, the Air Force CIO mentioned the Air Force has 20,000 applications. So when you look at the number that have actually migrated and the number that you expand in the entire DoD or federal government, it's just a tiny drop in the bucket. Like hardly anything has actually moved over.
Yeah, and I think the issue there also is that a lot of you were talking about the cleanup aspect, right? The fact of just data classification, for some of these applications and stuff that have kind of set within these enclaves, that's a very, very touchy thing at times, right? I mean, nobody wants to, be the one to say, check it off and say, yep, and then something bad, go bad. And you were talking about before, the breach that just occurred. I mean, these were very, very, in most situations, very old apps, but it still didn't do away with the fact that block and tackle probably would have done away with, 80% of that problem. Just make sure that, really the basics are covered.
And David, what are you seeing on the inside?
So for me, the real issue is that cloud computing is it's a revolution, not an evolution, right? And so the difficulty you have kind of getting through people's thought processes, like you referred to earlier, not wanting to be the first word like that, all the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that's kind of going on. I think the challenge is less so much that someone says go do it. It's a combination of the fiscal reality. I mean, you have to spend a little bit of money to retool to be able to take advantage of the money you're going to save, right? And the government, in my experience, doesn't necessarily do that very well. I mean, eventually we get there, but it's not typically an upfront cost thing. And the other thing is that there's really no one-stop shopping that a customer can go to be sort of walked through, especially a layman like myself, how do I get to the cloud?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, just from my personal experience, our challenges have not been with contracting. That's actually been the slickest thing that I've ever seen in 22 years. I mean, the contracts that we had to get to the cloud to get our development environment, bam, happened overnight. It's once you're in there, and then people, you're going to connect to what, and oh my gosh, and it's because those other offices, and this is the revolutionary part about it, those other offices aren't staged or set up to be able to service you. And so at every step of the way, I'm kind of learning that, oh, you need a C&D stack. Okay, what's that? Oh, you need some services, continuous monitoring. Oh, you got to do this, you got to do that. And I just want to add a little bit too. From a policy perspective, there's a lot of really good conversation and discourse going on in the wonks here in DC about how all the different services are kind of getting together and getting after things. And they spend a lot of time very high level talking about, oh, we got to watch out for the boogeyman under the bed, that this contracting has to follow these FAR clauses. It's all very good work. But at every one of the briefings that I saw, like the very last slide was, oh, but it's on the mission owner to accept the risk. And so the frustration that I have as the mission owner is I've assessed the risk, I'm ready to go, I just need enablers to help me get there. So it's not so much about asking you to make a decision, and everyone assumes that, oh, well, the risk is my job jar, and it's a my job jar. And it's a shared risk, because of obviously second, third order effects, but you gotta have some customer service at some point, right?
And with all the standards that are out there, it's interesting to me, and this is the same deal. I've multiple commercial sites earlier in the week. This is my third city. And this is the same thing that they're struggling with, which is the consumability of what you do, right? So I always tell people, you don't want to go out and buy a door and an engine and a gas pedal and just try to put a car together, right? You don't do that. And the problem is that roadmap oftentimes, even though all the standards are there to be able to get these mappings and what's required, it's really difficult to get that you can embrace it very quickly and say, we're doing this and we're down this path, right?
But if we had a PMO to go to as a customer, we'd have a very structured discussion about what it is that I do, so you could understand the risk that I'm willing to take, instead of it being about these boogeyman stories about, oh, well, it's the cloud and it's unsecure and all these other things.
That business process mapping.
Talk with specificity, don't talk in generality.
Sure. I want to come back to the PMO idea here in a minute, but as you pointed out, there's not a one-stop shop right now. But there are people who are trying to make this work. So rather than talk about here are the places where you just run into a wall, who are the people who can be your allies out there? You mentioned a couple, but who in DoD is helping to sort of knock down those barriers and be a Sherpa for the people who are trying to figure stuff out?
Did you want to start the Sherpa talk?
I'm probably not qualified to start the Sherpa talk.
I think that's Colonel David.
Well, no, there's nothing magic about me. I just got lucky enough to be asked to be up here. But there are some folks that, and I'll call them out by name. I mean, Micah Zeigen's been a great partner in this from our DA perspective, and he's actually very forward-thinking, and he's actually solving our problem with an environment, and he's got Tracy Hayter working with that. So there's just a couple of names. They may not mean anything to anybody, but I share those with you. But on the DISA side specifically, I know that Roger Greenwell and Jack Wilmer, Julie Mintz, those guys have been instrumental in being able to help us get through the hurdles. And they've got a difficult task over there. They've reorganized. And so in the midst of a reorganization and figuring out who does what to who internally in any bureaucracy, you're faced with the revolution of military affairs from a DoD perspective of going to the cloud. They have to kind of grapple with all that. And then and internally in every move, they've got a different story to tell from which stage agree for you at, and how much protectionism is going on, and people worried about their jobs. So besides just external fear, there's that reality, and we just have to address that.
I think you got to go back to the root also, is that let's not forget the root work that's been done by NIST and Maruja and his crew out there. I mean, these guys, there's lots of stuff that can be grasped by not only the DoD but also the federal government, in state and locals, and it is at times, but in pieces, parts at times. And like I said, it's a lot of good work that's there. It's just providing that roadmap, project management to do that business process mapping that sometimes that really becomes a sticking point.
Yeah, I'm big on kind of networking, not IT networking, but communications and finding those relationships, right? So I think the successful migrations have been where you find an AO, a mission owner, a C&D SP who's willing to move forward, and you have those conversations, and you kind of look, it's definitely not a technical challenge. It's a communications challenge, I think, and getting buy-in there. And also, I want to go back. I do want to beg to differ about the lack of a one-stop shop. Just come by the Booz Allen booth after,
Exactly.
after this at all.
SIG's,
Happy to talk to you guys.
SIG is implementing STIGs in a large quantity. I think also the thing is that when you talk about one-stop shop, there's no question that everybody would like to be able to glue this stuff together for folks. And but the thing is, oftentimes, is that I think it does take a hero. It does take the colonel here to kind of step up, and I'm not sure that that's the best way it needs to be, right? I don't know how many heroes you need to keep having over and over again that are taking this risk, like you said, taking the risk owner becomes that person, because that takes a lot of guts, and it's not always that people don't have the nerve to do their job, but when they have to extend beyond that, I'm not sure that if you need hero class people all the time that are willing to take that risk, the people that are the explorers, I just think that's kind of fraught with peril,
That's a fair point. So let's talk about a different kind of one-stop, that at a certain level, all this stuff still does need to run through DISA in certain ways. They're no longer the designated cloud broker, but as you raised, David, that you still have to get this connected to the network. You still have to deal with the continuous monitoring. How much of the challenge right now rests with DISA and just the amount of work that's on their plate and the structural challenges that they have? Is that where we need to be focusing our efforts?
You want to speak to the IT side?
And from the IT perspective, it's clear that the definition of where and when a cap is appropriate, how being able, one of the core value propositions of going to cloud is being able to rely on this infrastructure that lives out there, right? That has infinite scale, infinite bandwidth, not obviously infinite, but near infinite like that, across all these different pieces. As soon as you force feed that into, you have to go to these tiny little constrained points that are very limited in nature, you really crank down on what you're able to do in terms of scale, right? And so trying to move to a model where C&D suites can be inserted in closer proximity to the core cloud platforms, right? AWS, for instance, that becomes a much better enabler. And those are the sorts of conversations and issues that we're trying to work through from a technology perspective, is how do we get policy to allow that to happen and people to adopt that approach, right? Because we understand the clear need for C&D at 4 and 5 and all that, but it always having to be specifically rerouted back through a DISA network, boom, 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 for these very small constrained pipes, that really is a crippling effect.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say, the cap is definitely a challenge, and this point as a challenge a lot, but I think it's more a result of a bigger challenge. A lot of policies and requirements are actually written more as constraints and specific solutions that may or may not be applicable to all cases. And so you get stuck on saying, well, this is not going to work because X, Y, Z. But why do we need to do this? What's the reasoning for this? And so I think it's always helpful to take a step back and look at a holistic perspective. Look at the cap, look at the boundary protection, look at the application, look at the users. What are the requirements here? What do we need to accomplish? What are our threats? What do we need to protect against? And what's the end-to-end solution going to look like?
That's the magic right there when he's talking about, because what we've done is data classification in a lot of situations, and what we haven't done really well is user classification and application classification and where those three come together. And when you really look at that, because I don't so much look at it as from the network perspective, I look because all of these are endpoints in that situation. The data's an endpoint, the users are the applications. We just don't really mesh those things together well. And I will just as a side note, DISA takes a lot of heat, and for some of it maybe rightfully so, and some of it not. But the reality is that the work they've done over the last decade plus, it's been hard work. It was like the stages of grief situation, right? Everybody wants to be their own special snowflake, and it's time consuming to be your own special snowflake, especially down in the South, So
I could add to that too, and this is specifically not to the IT architecture side. The challenges associated with what this has to go through, because I hardly understand the spaghetti that goes along with that. I think, it's easy to kind of talk about the policies, the SRG in specific. Without the SRG written the way it is, we wouldn't have a conversation. Yeah. So you got to start somewhere. So even though it may be constrictive, they're coming out with version 1.2 and they'll have a 1.4. That's okay. We're documenting it, we're codifying it, we'll get through it. The cap itself is a solution looking for a problem to solve. And to your point, you've got to have something you've got to shove through the cap, right? I think the biggest unfortunate thing about the cap is the name, right? The cap says stop. It needs to be
that's very, very valid, dude.
Pipe or
for
something.
For the three people who wandered into the wrong room, can you explain what the cap is and why it matters in this?
I can.
Sure. The cap stands for Cloud Access Point.
Yeah.
And basically, it is the termination points out of, so level 4 and 5 require connection to a DoD network. So if there's data classification at level 4 and 5, SRG level 4 and 5, that will require a connection to the DoD network.
Yeah.
So you have to go through a cloud access point that is defined, specified, meets all the CND requirements, which is the network, edge detection systems, all that stuff. You have to have that in place, and there's not an unlimited supply of those, right? You're not plugging into the AWS cloud, for instance, from anywhere and just connecting to systems there and being able to do any kind of integration without going through that cap. And even worse from a technical perspective is if you have a system that lives in AWS and you have an end user that's connecting to a DoD network somewhere else across the planet, they have to connect to the DoD network, packet routes inside the cap, through the DoD network, back out through another cap to the AWS cloud to get to the information when the user could very well be sitting highly bandwidth connected to an endpoint that could directly touch that system, right? And so you have this round tripping that occurs that really impacts performance, scale. Again, that architecture is one who's kind of long in the tooth.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just real quick though, I mean, just full disclosure here, you got to understand that when the first SRG came out, even when they were defining the levels of classification, it was all going through the cap, and then we've slowly seen that change, right? So now up to level 2, and we got rid of a level. I don't remember which one that was, but
1 and 3.
now, right. So we've got rid of some level. My point though is that right now, from a mission owner perspective, that is enabling my mission to happen. So right now, I don't need the cap to get my mission up and running. So that's a step in the right direction. Now, in order to fully utilize the application that I'm developing, I want to go back to the DoD and I got to get to that level 4 certification. I'm willing to wait for that because I'm willing to get in the cloud, but I don't want to be the guy that opened the back door that someone take down the Department of Defense's systems. Right. I'm not being a spook sayer in that regard, but it's okay to wait on that a little bit. Yeah. So we're making steps in the right direction. Clearly not as fast as some people would like. But it's okay to take a little caution.
Well, I mean, the movement towards multiple ingress egress points and things like that for that, I get that. But at the same time, like you said, the vulnerabilities associated with that, that's what they have to be concerned with. So, and I think that there's not enough eyes at times in that situation right now. People are overtasked, and people can say, well, we can just communicate this way, and that's just like that's the argument for split tunneling. But there's intrinsic risk in that. There's vulnerabilities associated with that, and I don't mind if you say, you can't say no. You can say, so I understand what you want to do. Here are the risks you need to accept to do that, and there's a lot of business process owners that may not want to accept those risks that way.
I want to take it to the audience if there are questions. Anything we have for the panel? Yes, sir, here in the third row.
Is there a microphone?
There's not, but I'll repeat it back for the crowd.
Amazon was one of the first to kind of jump ahead, way ahead, with impact level 4. I was just wondering if you knew why they did that and kind of what benefits you've gotten from that, and has the government been able to utilize that at all, considering I don't even think there's been a second company that's been able to do it yet until I think Oracle's going to be able to do it in a month or so.
Sure. So the question is about getting to impact level 4 and how Amazon's moving forward and what the payoffs have been so far.
You got a plan out there?
Yeah, exactly. So this is, I'm going to defer to my guys down in the front row for some level of detail if we need to go there. But generally speaking, getting that accreditation or capability in place it's really just table stakes, right?
Sure.
We need to be able we needed to be able to get there just to have the conversation to move ahead on any of these higher level workloads. To date, it's really been the other policy issues that have, I think, been the blocker. Right, that it's the connectivity piece. We can put all the data up there that we want to. Just the problem is nobody can get to it yet in a very effective way. So that's been the challenge. But I don't know if there's any more detail that you guys would like to throw in there. Sufficient? Okay.
One of the benefits, of course, is it makes analysis of alternatives very simple. Either you can host it or it can't. There's only
right,
one
no
solution,
doubt.
So. But of course, there are drawbacks to that
nice.
as well, right? When there's competition.
Good point.
Well, in the discussion of level 4 data too, you got to get specific about what you're talking about, right?
Sure.
I mean, there's level 4 and there's level 4, right? So, for example, I don't want my pay stub level 4 data necessarily be the first guy to get out there and get into level 4. But that's a personal issue, and I got to get over my own fear and grief. But there are certain applications of the 20,000 that you mentioned within the Air Force that are ripe for the picking.
Sure.
But then it goes back to it's about good timing. The specific mission owner has to have the resources to be able to make that change, that house cleaning effort in a fiscally constrained environment and be ready to go to take advantage of the long-term savings.
And that's so valid because oftentimes the rewards off the back side, the expenditures off the front side with effort and staff, to get that kind of expertise, what you're doing, the business process mapping. And so it's really hard to make that ROI case sometimes for these guys to say, yeah, we're going to do all this, and then in 24 months, we're going to have recouped our costs, and we're going to be leaner and meaner. That's not.
Well, it doesn't go back to you either.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, I was in state government for 19 years. I definitely understand that concept.
Yes, sir. Blue shirt, streamlined haircut.
Streamlined haircut. Oh, okay, I get it.
My question is this. So when there's a system that's built, significant percentage of the resources goes towards security. Okay? And when there's another requirement that's there, another system that's built, again, a significant percent, like 20, 30% of the resources in my experience. My question is with cloud, especially, DevOps, cloud formation, and all these tool sets where you can basically develop the whole infrastructure and have the security implemented as part of the infrastructure. Do you see that not one shop or one-stop solution? Do you see the solution to problem space becoming smaller as we go forward? So if it's solved well the first time and improved upon the second time, third time, the nth time it becomes a significantly smaller percentage. So the next system is only at 30% resources.
Does that mean that all the consultants are going to partner together?
Good luck. But I'm not seeing that. I'm not going to take issue necessarily, but the numbers we see on expenditures 5 to 7%. I mean, if you do it right, as far as what you spend on security. And I'm not exactly sure what the metric you're talking about is, but I do think that the shared service model, that's what the cloud, that's the power of the cloud, right? I don't care if it's a public cloud, private cloud, hybrid, whatever. That shared services model and being able to do. But if you don't embrace the pieces that you can share and use that shared services model, you're just going to keep basically just replicating, and the same cost is going to be there. It's just like if you're in a situation where you don't reuse code within your organization, you have to redevelop the wheel every time. Then that goes to, the stages of grief. Well, mine's a little bit better than yours. Well, let's find the commonality there and not reinvent the wheel. Don't be your own special snowflake.
But I think there is some validity to the approach, and it's certainly part of our core value messaging that programmatically derived infrastructure that essentially deploying systems to include security systems all the way from the bottom of the stack up. Deploying those systems that are derived from code, where every versioning of that code, I'm actually getting more secure. And yes, absolutely. If I'm able to effectively implement that across the organization, so that by policy I know that the only systems are getting deployed in that manner.
Right.
Now I think we have actually been able to reduce the cost of security significantly, and essentially guarantee that I am always incrementally getting better. Right.
Yeah.
So there's core value.
And
there.
from my perspective, the new vertical is horizontal. I mean, really, it's just don't, reuse. Whether it be the, people, processes, technology, there's only 5 to 10% of this that really is your special sauce, right?
Right.
I mean,
It's undifferentiated heavy lifting.
sorry. OODA loop.
There you go.
Yes, sir. Second row.
That's good.
This is for Amazon, probably not to reflect. A lot of your government implementation, you talked about reusing the code. How many of, generally, are they looking at just individual projects, or has anyone gone over and tried to set like a virtual data center in the cloud to help get all that pre-configured, made so new projects
Good question.
come in quickly?
efficient.
Very efficient.
Absolutely. So
Let me just restate that.
The Army's
I think I understand. In the interest of reuse, is Amazon working with DoD to try and build more of a platform as a service for this rather than the infrastructure as a service to help the standardization and the reuse?
Yeah, so I can tell you that our most sophisticated and mature customers, whether it's in the commercial space, the DoD space, certainly in the civilian space that I cover, the ones that have embraced that approach where they have defined for the enterprise these implementation and deployment standards to do exactly that, essentially deploy entire data centers programmatically, right, that they literally can take down an entire region as part of their DR recovery, and there's not even a blip in service, right, because they have done so much to automate DR, automate high availability, and automate their security posture to the largest extent possible. So once you do that as an enterprise, what you're left with is focusing on the value mission work, right?
That's the key.
And you're just relying on this, again, very standardized reduction of complexity, removal of a lot of, we're doing it this way over here, we're doing it this way over there. that goes away.
Yeah.
And the most sophisticated organizations are absolutely embracing that.
Well, and the conversation changes, right? Instead of focusing on security, which is very important, it actually focuses on leveraging scale, but it also focuses on your ability for reliability. And I think that's a huge, huge point. Reliability is probably more important than cost savings.
Yeah, availability in that situation trumps it, right? I mean, people always talk about confidentiality, but, in a warfighter situation, availability. I mean, because, if someone gets the data that's not in real time at that point in time, you're past that moment. I think that's sometimes people forget just what the cloud can do, especially when you're dealing with Amazon and stuff in that situation. I'll also tell you that a lot of the fear that gets spread sometimes is that, people like to physically touch things, at times, but also there's a lot of skill sets that have been developed over the last 20, 30 years in this data center space. Let's not mince words. Yeah, I mean, it's like, so what you have to do is you have to make sure these people realize that you're not just getting rid of them, right? You repurpose them, you're doing whatever. I mean, that doesn't sound really good to repurpose a person, but I'm just, what I'm saying. I'm morphing their skill sets or evolving their skill sets to participate in the new world, right?
Yeah, so that's the message I take to my customers as well, right? So there's the idea of doing it the same way over and over again, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. That can certainly bring savings, but also, think of a data center, for example. There's a number of enterprise or shared services, all the way from management to patching to monitoring to security. So we try to take the same approach when we work with our customers in the cloud as well. So you don't want to implement a security solution for every single application, because then you're paying unnecessary licenses, and there's some waste there. So by deploying more enterprise services in the cloud that can be shared, you can benefit.
So think about it too from a systems perspective, right? If an installation is a warfighting platform, yes, the cloud and the computer and the data is important, but if the power goes out, it's worthless, right? So the trick is that we're privatizing utilities, we're taking advantage of renewable energy and different sources, but we diversify the portfolio.
There you go.
So you're getting that same diversification in the cloud because of the very nature of the asset that you're tying into. We just have to change the conversation.
Yeah, and the ops has to basically the ops savings at times haven't been used to feed the more secure, easier to use aspect of things, right? So there's savings in that situation. And then, like you said, you don't get that back in your budget necessarily, right, when you save all of this. And I also think that when you think about that, the standards for data interchange haven't really been there. There's a lot of API integration. There's a lot of things like that. So actually, when you think about like what Intel's very keen on is buses. How do you move the industry forward, right? ISA bus, not necessarily always better than microchannel bus, but everybody could write to it. You didn't have to get on bended knee to beg to write to it, and it was 6 times less expensive. USB. People remember parallel cables and serial cables, right? DB9s and 25s. You don't have to worry about that anymore when you walk into a store. DXL, data exchange layer, is the same thing for us as a security bus. It's not just a security bus, it's a pub-sub informational exchange. So I don't care what systems you're pulling from or where they're coming from. The key is, how do I digest that and how do I make it consumable so that I don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time? I don't do these integrations.
How do I explain to people on the short bus? That's the question.
I think you just got to make it short burst worthy.
All right, we are coming up on time. I want to make sure we get all the questions in. Sir, about halfway back on this side.
I'm a government civilian, and love to be in the cloud, right, doing work. And so I'm just curious, though, when you talk about fear and risk, right, how is it any different when going to the cloud than actually setting up a network that's exposed, or AT&T or to that effect? I mean, because I hear it a lot, but you quantify it. I mean,
Ubiquitous access is the issue.
Yeah,
difference in, the hardware in play, right? But there's this mindset of fear.
Yeah. Question is the cloud really different when it comes to the access and the risk that you're assuming, as opposed to something in your own data center that has a connection to the outside world?
So I just, from a government perspective, as a previous commander, I mean, it's kind of the Terry Chevalier effect, right? Khobar Towers, everybody remember that? Terry Chevalier wanted to move the fence line. Khobar Towers, Obama happened. He doesn't get promoted because of that. It's his fault. It was outside his control. No one wants to be that person that brings it down. So what do you get? You get anti-terrorism force protection, physical requirements that don't make any sense on every single building on an installation, but it feeds that fear that you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's the same effect with regards to the cloud. You have to be able to just kind of work at everybody at every level in their stages of grief.
And I will tell you that right now, think about this. You fire up wireless access points wherever you are in your building. Okay, your data center, unless you're fully deployed with things like 802.1x and stuff like that, iterative informational aspects where you have total visibility of who's there and what their context is, you're a cloud. I mean, you've got the same, it may not be accessible from the internet all the time exactly, and that's the challenge, right? The ubiquitous access of that is what scares people. But the reality is that any unsecured aspect that is wireless can, someone can sit over there at the Hardee's, we don't have Hardee's here, do we? McDonald's, and, access your network. So the challenge also is that in this situation, though, the cloud gives you the power if you can get there of not having to recreate it all the time. And that security best practices, best actionable practice becomes very consumable, just like the data best practices come, just like the communications aspect. I think that goes people don't realize that just if you have a good process, it becomes stronger when you can replicate it over and over again.
And I think, too, to add to that, the disconnection of the management plane and infrastructure that can affect how traffic accesses the application tier, where things live, that complete disconnection between those two things enables another level of security that you just frankly don't get in an on-premise world.
And visibility trumps everything, let's be clear. So wherever you can get those points of visibility, that's the magic.
So I'll get a last point in here, I guess, on that question. Yeah, it's absolutely just optics, right? So how's it going to look in the Washington Post? If your traditional data center gets hacked, well, it was a well-funded, state-sponsored attack. There's really not much we could do there. But if it's in the cloud, the cloud's not secure. Why'd you go to the cloud? Why'd you put your sensitive data in the cloud to begin with?
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely just
and let's also be clear, the definition of cloud, ask 10 people, you'll get 12 definitions. I mean, it's, I
don't think Snowden worked in the cloud either.
No, of course not. And his ports weren't epoxied right. I mean, so.
All right. We're at time. We're going to do 2 lightning round questions. You, sir, on the aisle with the beard.
Quick question specific to GovCloud. What's the client responsibility in terms of CAP and the shared responsibility?
So with GovCloud, what is the client responsibility with regards to CAP?
So we're going through the onboarding process right now, and what we're discovering is, and this is a growth industry, right, for DISA specifically and for our DAA as well too, as they're standing up C&D services, we're finding out there's just some gaps in what the SRG requires and what we actually have inherent, and it's just a matter of having that honest conversation about all the inherited controls and who's doing what to who and the reportability of that. So it's a little bit of a round robin. So to ask the specific question on what the client's responsibility is, we assume all the risk at the mission end, and we assume all the responsibility to procure the services, whether we're paying for it by mandate, by having to go through the cap, essentially, or we're paying for it through third-party services. We just have to figure out how to cover all the gaps and do it in a way that makes everybody happy along the way. So that's the responsibility, but we are actually in cahoots or in hand walking through the onboarding process.
Last question here from the moderator's mic is, we talked a little bit about the idea of a PMO, and so I'm going to ask the question in that context, but feel free to use your prerogative to just make your closing remarks here. If we were going to spin up a PMO or a center of excellence or something to help move to the cloud, what would you want them tackling? What's part of their mandate on day one?
Real quick, I think go out and find the best. I mean, you already have centers of excellence. I think that's the challenge. Don't assume because you spin up a center of excellence that you're the center of excellence. So I think that's hubris. That goes very badly, right? So. But I mean, for instance, we were just talking about the Army's done a good job. All the services have, but the Army's done a really good job, and they're doing these centers of excellence aspect down in Fort Gordon's. Fort Gordon's one of them that's coming up. But I think that there are such practices. It's basically going out and doing your gap analysis of what exists and then taking from that and finding out, in these situations, here's how we're going to mesh together these really amazing things that people are already doing. And then go ahead and create your excellence piece if you want to.
Brad, anything you'd add?
Yeah, my advice isn't to the PMO, it's to the people who create the PMO. Give them funding and the power to do their job. Otherwise, there's just going to be one more roadblock to migrating.
Todd?
I'm going to say send them all to Amazon certified architect training and make sure that they understand our platform, and then you're good.
That's a good point.
David, you get the last word.
I think the main concern for me would be, talk about the funding part of it. It needs to be a fee-for-service sort of an organization, because organizations that want to get to the cloud should be paying for that. And don't, to your point, don't reinvent the wheel. Yeah. Just use the wheels that are out there and have the freedom to be able to do that. And then the last thing I'd say is, don't be risk averse. If your customer comes to you and says that I'm willing to accept risk to do what I need to do to get my mission done, then you're an enabler. Yeah. You are not a roadblock. You need to be able to get me through that process, whatever it is.
One thing I will say is that I've been we've spun it, like in South Carolina, I was C1 law enforcement CIO for probation. I was also security domain chairman. I did leave 2 years before the breach. Thank you very much. It was not my issue. It is my issue now, but it was not my issue then. So, but when you spin up a PMO like that, you got to be very careful that you do not put Napoleon in charge. I mean, and I will tell you right now that it needs to be someone who can build relationships, not only with vendors, but those internal business customers. And it doesn't mean to be my way or the highway. That is a disaster. You know, and so I think that the carrot works much better than the stick in that situation.
That is a tall order, though. I mean, not the Napoleon part, but just do all those things that we just
you're right.
All right, well, on that optimistic note, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Good stuff, man. Good job. I can go back to my old name now.
Thank you very much. Did you have your